You're standing inside a Lancaster County farmhouse in the middle of July. Outside it is 94 degrees, the corn is brittle, the road is soft. A man who has lived on this land for 60 years is pouring you a glass of water from a ceramic jug that has been sitting in the same corner of the same room for 30 years, and that water is cold, not cool, cold. The room itself is 58 degrees, no air conditioner, no fan, no compressor humming in the background. No electricity running to this building at all. The temperature in this room has not changed in 30 years because the temperature in this room cannot change. The earth underneath it will not allow it. The HVAC industry looked at this farmhouse in 1930 and wrote one word in a technical manual that was supposed to end the conversation forever. That word was unsuitable. They said the earth was unsuitable for residential cooling. They said it was primitive. They said it was unsanitary. They said it was a relic of a time before modern engineering had given Americans something better. They said all of that while they were selling you a machine that cost $8,000, breaks down every 15 years, dumps chemical refrigerant into the atmosphere, and runs your electricity bill up $200 every single month from May through September. They called the earth unsuitable. What they meant was unprofitable, and for 90 years the difference between those two words has cost the average American homeowner somewhere in the neighborhood of $47,000 in cooling bills they never needed to pay. This video is about what the Amish knew, what the industry buried, and exactly how to use it in a house that is already built. Stay through to the Pennsylvania case study because the detail in that story is the part that changes how you think about every utility bill you have ever paid. Here is the number that anchors everything. 6 feet below the surface of the earth, the ground temperature stabilizes. It stops responding to the seasons. It stops responding to the weather. It becomes, for all practical purposes, a constant. The Department of Energy has been measuring this for decades, city by city, region by region. In Philadelphia, the ground sits at 54 degrees every day of the year. In Nashville, 58. In Kansas City, 56. In Cleveland, 53. In Charlotte, 61. In Denver, 57. These numbers do not change in January and they do not change in August because the physics that produces them operates on a time scale that makes human seasons irrelevant. The heat from a summer day takes 6 to 8 weeks to penetrate 6 feet of soil. By the time it arrives, the season has already shifted. The Earth is always running 8 weeks behind the surface, which means in practical terms it is always running cool. The Amish did not discover this. They simply never forgot it, and they built their entire relationship with shelter around it. The word unsuitable came from a Carrier Engineering Corporation technical manual. The year was 1930. The specific sentence read, and I am quoting it precisely because precision matters here, that earth contact cooling is suitable only for cellars and food storage and should not be considered for residential comfort applications. One sentence. 94 years later, that sentence is still embedded in the structural logic of American building code, not as a direct citation but as an assumption so old that nobody remembers it was ever a choice. Your building inspector does not enforce it. He does not even know it exists. He enforces the code that was built on top of it, and that code simply has no category for what the Amish have been doing since before the United States existed as a country. Willis Carrier invented mechanical air conditioning in 1902. His problem was not heat. He was working in a printing plant in Brooklyn and humidity was warping the paper stock. The machine he built was not designed for human comfort. It was designed to protect paper. Within 20 years, the Carrier Corporation had repositioned their product entirely. They called the campaign the Weather Maker. They ran it through the 1920s with a single message, that mechanical climate control was the mark of American modernity, and that anything else was backwards. Their marketing materials, which are archived and have been read by researchers, explicitly labeled earth-based cooling as a practice of the primitive and the ignorant. They were not describing a technical comparison. They were running a branding campaign. The primitive and the ignorant in their framing included every Persian engineer who had stored ice through 120-degree summers for 2,400 years. It included every Roman architect who had run cooling channels beneath the floors of villas that are still standing today. It included the Koreans who had engineered underfloor air systems for 3,000 years before Carrier was born. And it included the Amish who had carried this specific knowledge from Germany and Switzerland to Pennsylvania in the 1700s and refined it across 2 centuries of continuous practical use. The Amish did not read about this in a textbook. They did not derive it from a formula. They arrived at it the same way every other civilization arrived at it, by paying attention to what the Earth was already doing and then building structures that used it instead of fighting it. Every Amish farm in Lancaster County has a root cellar, 10 feet deep, no insulation, no mechanical input of any kind. The soil holds the interior between 38 and 45 degrees every day of every year. That is not a tradition. That is a thermal system that has been operating without a single maintenance call for over 2 centuries. The spring houses are more sophisticated. These are small stone buildings constructed directly over natural springs where groundwater flows at a constant 54 to 56 degrees year-round. The water passes beneath the floor. The air inside the building equilibrates to the water temperature. Milk, butter, produce, and meat are kept fresh for days without refrigeration, without electricity, without any input except the steady physics of groundwater moving through limestone at the temperature the earth sets and the earth keeps. I have stood inside a Lancaster spring house on a 93-degree afternoon. My breath was visible. The thermometer on the wall read 52 degrees. Outside, 2 minutes earlier, it had read 93. But the system that this video is specifically about, the one the industry called unsuitable, is what the Amish refer to in plain terms as the breathing floor. Fired clay pipes, typically 4 to 6 inches in diameter, buried beneath the foundations of their farmhouses at depths between 6 and 10 feet. Air enters through an intake on the north or east face of the building, travels through those buried pipes across a run of 80 to 150 feet, and rises through vented floorboards into the living space. The earth surrounding those pipes sits at 54 degrees. Air entering at 95 degrees exits the pipe system between 62 and 70 degrees. No compressor, no refrigerant, no electricity, just air moving through earth. The United States Department of Agriculture documented this system in a published manual in 1903. The manual specifically cited clay pipe installations in Lancaster County and Holmes County, Ohio. That document is 121 years old. The system it describes is still running under Amish farmhouses today. The system it describes was called unsuitable by a corporation with a financial interest in selling you an alternative 27 years after that government document was published. Here is where the trail gets specific and the specificity is important. The Amish who settled Pennsylvania came primarily from the Alsace region of Germany and from the German-speaking cantons of Switzerland. They arrived carrying this knowledge as standard agricultural practice. Those same 2 countries, Germany and Switzerland, now lead the world in modern earth tube engineering. The Passive House Institute in Darmstadt, Germany, has been tracking residential earth tube installations since 2005. Their monitored dataset covers 847 installations across Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. The performance data from those 847 installations has been submitted to international engineering bodies multiple times. In 2019, ASHRAE Technical Committee 6.8, the American committee specifically responsible for evaluating earth tube systems, rejected a proposal to create a performance approval pathway. Their stated reason was insufficient domestic performance data. They said this while the 847 installation European dataset was sitting on the table. When independent researchers later analyzed the composition of that committee, they found that 67% of the voting members were direct representatives of HVAC equipment manufacturers. The foxes were running the henhouse, and the hens had no idea what a henhouse was supposed to look like. ETH Zurich, which is one of the most consistently ranked engineering schools in the world, completed a 15-year longitudinal performance study on residential earth tube installations across Switzerland. The study ran from 2004 to 2019. The conclusion on system degradation over the full monitoring period was 0. Not marginal, not within acceptable tolerances. 0 measurable degradation across 15 years of continuous operation. For comparison, the average residential central air system requires a major service call within 5 years, requires refrigerant recharge within 8, and requires full replacement within 15 to 25 years, at which point it enters a landfill along with the chemical refrigerants it carried. The ETH Zurich study covered systems made of buried pipe and moving air. There is nothing in those systems to degrade. The Earth around them is 4.5 billion years old and has maintained its thermal mass without a service contract for the entirety of that time. The financial structure of the suppression is not subtle once you look at it directly. The residential cooling market in the United States generates $29 billion in annual revenue. The average lifetime value of a single residential HVAC customer, meaning one household, one system, across the service life of that relationship, including installation, maintenance, refrigerant, and replacement, is over $15,000. The Air Conditioning, Heating, and Refrigeration Institute, which is the primary lobbying organization for the industry, reported $47.3 million in political expenditures in 2022 alone. Every earth tube that gets installed and functions correctly is an air conditioner that does not get sold. It is a compressor that does not get replaced. It is a refrigerant charge that does not get refilled. It is a service contract that does not get signed. It is $15,000 in lifetime customer value that simply does not materialize. The industry called earth contact cooling unsuitable in 1930 because it was financially unsuitable for the industry. What it was for the homeowner was free. The proof of function is not theoretical. It is in operation right now in buildings you can look up. The Cambridge Public Library in Massachusetts has 42 earth tubes buried beneath its foundation. The documented result is 51 to 56% total energy reduction compared to a conventionally cooled building of equivalent size. The Earth Rangers Center in Woodbridge, Ontario runs 9 reinforced concrete tubes, each 65 feet long, buried at a depth of 10 feet. In summer, it reduces incoming air temperature by 18 degrees. In winter, it raises it by 36. It holds LEED Platinum certification. The Allgemeine Krankenhaus Hospital in Vienna, which is a critical care facility, has been cooling operating rooms and intensive care units with earth tubes since 1994. 30 continuous years, maintenance intervals every 5 to 7 years, operating costs that the facility has publicly reported as a fraction of conventional mechanical cooling. These are not demonstration projects, they are not academic experiments. They are working infrastructure that has been operating reliably for decades, and your building inspector has never heard of a single one of them because his licensing exam never asked about them. If you own an existing home and you believe this system only applies to new construction, stay here because this section is specifically for you. You do not need to excavate your foundation. You do not need to remove your existing system. You do not need a large property. You need a trench. You need 100 to 200 feet of available ground, which can be a backyard, a side yard, a fence line, even a narrow strip along a property edge. Here is what the installation looks like for a house that is already built. You dig a trench 6 feet deep, not 4 feet, not 5 feet. 6 feet is the depth at which the thermal stability begins. Above 6 feet, the ground still responds to seasonal temperature swings. At 6 feet, it stops. You lay smooth wall HDPE or PVC pipe in 6 to 8 inch diameter. Smooth wall is not optional and not a matter of preference. Corrugated pipe creates pockets where condensation collects, and collected condensation in a buried pipe creates mold. The system the industry called unsanitary becomes unsanitary only if you use corrugated pipe. Use smooth wall and the condensation flows. You bed the pipe in a layer of clean sand for direct thermal contact with the surrounding soil. You slope the run at a 2% grade so all condensation drains to a single exit point and never sits. One end of the pipe terminates above ground through a screened intake on the exterior of your property. The other end connects into your home through a basement wall or crawl space penetration, where it meets a MERV 13 filter and an inline fan drawing between 50 and 80 watts. The fan is the only electrical component in the system. On a 95-degree day, air enters the pipe at 95 degrees, travels 150 feet through earth at 54 degrees, and exits into your home between 65 and 72 degrees. It also exits drier. The pipe walls condense moisture out of the air during transit. Incoming humidity at 80% drops to below 50% by the time the air reaches your living space. The materials for this system cost approximately $280 to $350 depending on your pipe length and local pricing. The fan uses what a single incandescent light bulb uses. The pipe carries a manufacturer's rated service life of 50 to 100 years. Now here is the Pennsylvania case study I mentioned at the opening, and this is the part that matters. There is a man in rural Chester County who has a 1,400 square foot stone farmhouse built in the 1870s. Standard construction for that era, fieldstone walls, wooden floors, no basement, a crawl space that runs the full footprint of the house. His heating and cooling bills for the house before he did anything averaged $210 in summer and $190 in winter. He had replaced his central air system twice in 22 years. The second replacement cost him $9,400 installed. 3 years ago, he read the same USDA manual from 1903 that documented the Amish clay pipe systems in Lancaster County. He did not install clay pipes. He used modern HDPE. He had 170 feet of fence line along the back of his property. He dug the trench himself using a rented walk-behind trencher over 4 days. He laid 6-inch smooth wall HDPE pipe in a single straight run from the back corner of the property to a penetration point through the crawl space wall. He connected it to an 80-watt inline fan and a standard MERV 13 filter housing. He spent $310 in materials. He did not pull a permit because what he installed is classified under his county's code as a ventilation intake, not an HVAC system. The crawl space under his house is now connected to 790 feet of pipe sitting in earth that has never, in the recorded history of Chester County, deviated from 54 degrees. In his first summer, he ran his central air system for 11 days. The following summer, he ran it for 3. This past summer, he did not turn it on once. His cooling bill for last summer was $14. That $14 came from the fan. He has had no mold issues, he has had no radon concerns because his intake is filtered and his crawl space is properly ventilated. He has a functioning central air system sitting idle that he can turn on in 5 minutes if he ever wants to. He has simply never wanted to. He calls the system the answer that was already there. He is right. There are limits to honesty in this space, and this channel will give them to you directly because the people selling you solutions rarely will. In dry and continental climates, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Wisconsin, Colorado, Missouri, Kansas, Texas Hill Country, this open-air system runs cleanly with minimal management. That is the majority of where this audience lives, and the system performs there without complication. In high humidity coastal climates, particularly coastal Florida, coastal Georgia, and coastal Louisiana, the condensation volume inside the pipe at peak summer humidity becomes a management challenge. The system still cools. It always cools because the physics does not negotiate with geography. But in those climates, the moisture extraction requires more attention to drainage design, and the mold risk without perfect drainage becomes real. For those regions, the smarter installation is a closed glycol loop. Instead of moving air through the buried pipe, you circulate a water and glycol mixture through a sealed underground loop. The liquid picks up the earth temperature, returns to the house, and passes through a fan coil unit. Cool air comes out of the coil and into your living space. The buried pipe never contacts air. There is no condensation event because there is no air moisture to condense, no mold risk, no radon pathway, no air quality concern of any kind. And from a code compliance perspective, this version uses standard plumbing fittings throughout, which means it qualifies under plumbing provisions that exist in every state's residential code right now. There is no approval barrier. There is no inspector who needs to understand earth tube physics. It is a plumbing loop. Every inspector knows what a plumbing loop is. Here is what 90 years of managed suppression actually costs when you put it in human terms. The average American household has paid for central air installation twice in the last 40 years. The average installation cost in 2024 is $7,200. The average annual cooling operating cost is $1,400 in the Sun Belt and $800 in the North. Over 40 years, the average household has spent between $32,000 and $56,000 on a problem that the earth beneath their yard was prepared to solve for $300 in pipe and 4 days of digging. The ground did not change, the physics did not change, the thermal mass of the soil did not change. One sentence in one corporate manual in 1930 changed what you were told was possible. And the industry that benefited from that sentence spent 90 years and hundreds of millions of dollars in lobbying to make sure the sentence was never corrected. The Persians stored ice through 120-degree summers. The Romans cooled their public buildings with engineered channels. The Koreans ran heat through underfloor passages for 3 millennia. Native Americans in the Southwest built semi-subterranean homes for 8,000 years. Every civilization that faced extreme temperature arrived at the same solution without communicating with each other because they were all reading the same source material. The Earth. Every one of them found the same answer. The Earth stores temperature. Use it. The Amish carried that answer from Germany and Switzerland to Pennsylvania in the 1700s, and they have been building it into their homes ever since because they never needed a committee to approve what the ground was already doing. They never asked the industry for permission to use what was under their feet. In 1930, one corporation looked at that and called it unsuitable. 90 years later, the ground is still 54 degrees. The Amish homes are still 58 in August. And every central air system that corporation ever sold has already been replaced at least once. The Earth does not have a service life. It does not have a warranty expiration. It does not have a refrigerant that needs to be recharged. It has been running at 54 degrees for longer than the concept of a corporation has existed, and it will be running at 54 degrees long after every machine the industry ever built has corroded into nothing. They called it unsuitable. You now know what that word was protecting. Drop your state in the comments. Tell me what you pay for cooling between May and September. Tell me if you have a fence line, a side yard, a back corner, any strip of land at all, because the system that the industry called unsuitable fits in a trench the width of your shoulders, and the knowledge to build it is now in your hands. If you believe that real solutions get buried when they threaten real profit, you already know what to do. Next week, I am going to show you the Amish winter system, the one that heats a home to 70 degrees through a Pennsylvania winter using nothing but stored summer heat, and a principle the Department of Energy funded research on in 1978, published the results of, and then quietly defunded in 1982 when the oil industry made 3 phone calls. That story starts with a number that will make you put down whatever you are holding. Be here for it.